Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about Deckbuilder RPGs. Those are role-playing games where your abilities, or sometimes even more than that, are given to you randomly from a shuffled deck. This is not my area of expertise, but Wami Benito 2558 asked, would you have any opinions on card/deck builder based RPGs where character abilities are represented by cards and are also not guaranteed to play out the same way every combat, since in some fights you might never draw a particular card? Yes. I will tell you something. My response, you guessed it, is nuanced. I originally wrote a short response to this comment, but it wasn't expressing the way I felt, and I also thought that in writing it looked negative, which I've been told sometimes emails, my memoir, comes across as negative. And then when I say it, people are like, oh, I like it. It's not negative at all. So I figured I'd do that with my answer to this. So, Deckbuilder RPGs. Let me tell you why I like them. I haven't played that many, but I will tell you why I like them and also why I like the whole idea behind that mechanic. It's relatively new. It's not new in the tabletop world, but it's relatively new in the computer world. It's different. I like that. I really love that it promotes replayability. People will play it over and over again because the randomness introduced in that deck of cards means part of the game is based on your skill and part of it is completely up to random numbers. Like any card game. I mean, you can be the best poker player in the world, but if you get dealt a bad hand, you might not be able to win. You can try bluffing, you can try all these other techniques, but as opposed to if you got dealt, I don't play poker, the best poker hand. What I also love about Deckbuilder RPGs, and this is a particular thing that has nagged me throughout my career, is it gets players to try new abilities that they may never have chosen. And this is something I've always dithered on. It's like, how do I get players to pick classes they don't usually pick? How do I get them to pick skills they don't normally pick? How do I get them to pick perks they don't normally pick? And that was why, Flaws kind of tried to do that in Outer Worlds. It's like, hey, I know you don't want this, but I'll let you pick more perks. I love this method because if you get dealt, a certain ability that you don't normally use, well, there it is in your hand, and you at least have to consider using it. The other reason I like Deckbuilder RPGs is they introduce randomness in a form that most gamers understand and don't complain about. I have a whole video on implementing randomness that you can watch. Many people don't understand randomness. They use the word random as a term without understanding what it means. And they don't exactly describe what they want. What I love about Deckbuilder RPGs is everybody knows and understands a deck of cards. And they understand, okay, Fireball may be in that deck, but it may just not be dealt to me. So I may not be able to Fireball. Where in computer games, they're like, this game has a horrible random number generator. I can't believe Fireball hasn't come up. I played 3 times, never saw Fireball. This game sucks. The programmer was an idiot. You can't really look at a deck of cards and go, you're a dumb deck of cards. I mean, I guess people do. I know people throw dice in dice jails. But anyway, so I love that because it's a kind of randomness, decks and cards, that people get. And that randomness mixes up the game and introduces replayability and, like I said, trying different abilities just because you happen to get them. I love that. Now let's talk about the other hand, which is what I wrote in the comment and then said I want to talk about it because I'm not nearly as negative about this as I sound in text. When I play an RPG, and this is me, I want to create a new character that I make, and then I want to explore your setting. And that's what I approach almost every RPG. If you call yourself an RPG, that's my preconceived notion. I make the character, you make the setting. Together, we explore the world and a story comes out of it. Many people, though, that's not what they go into an RPG for. A lot of people seem to want to be handed a character that's pre-made, pre-named, pre-abilitied. And then they go through the setting in it, often playing along in a predetermined story, sometimes a linear predetermined story. None of this is wrong. But I would argue that the former way that I play is more RPG than the latter way I described. Not because it's wrong, but because that's what RPGs, the genesis of RPGs, were. You make a character, then you play in a world that GM provides, and together a story emerges. That's the roots. As you grow away from it, you're, by definition, moving away from that. So I have a whole video, by the way, on what an RPG is, and I describe it as a continuum. And it's not just a single line continuum. There's a lot of axes about different features, and the feature can be in a little bit or a lot, or it can be the entire RPG can be based on that feature. When people have arguments over whether or not a game is an RPG, what they're usually arguing about is whether it has a feature or not in general, but often where along that continuum they draw the line, and they say, there's not enough skill, or I don't get to make a character, or the story's too linear. It's a continuum, and they're like, this is where I draw the line, and below that, I don't consider that an RPG. So that's why there's a lot of arguments about what an RPG is. There's so much subjectivity to where that line is drawn. People don't argue whether or not a feature is in the game. They argue whether or not that feature or the lack of it converts this game into not being an RPG anymore. And because the continuum is very long and multi-axial, that's where all the arguments come in. For me, Deckbuilder RPGs lie somewhere in that continuum of whether or not they're an RPG, because there's an axis of being handed a character and being completely able to make your own character. And Deckbuilder RPGs lie on that continuum. For some people, it's past their line. For other people, it's before the line. For me, my take on it is, well, it's not a pre-made character. I'm not handed a pre-made character with a name and a background and a preset set of abilities. But it's also not one I got to make, especially because it may not be what I wanted to play. If I sat down at this game and I'm like, I just want to play like a fire wizard, and I don't get dealt any fire abilities, well, guess what? I didn't get to play that. Now, that may be the wrong expectation for this kind of game, but my expectation is where I draw a line in that continuum, and those games don't reach it. So in general, I don't play a lot of deck builder RPGs because I prefer making my own character. But for all the reasons I said, I love that these exist because they introduce a lot of really cool newness to the RPG space, which is something I also like. So those two things, pull at me from different directions. Let me end, because I'm a game developer, let me end with, what is my recommendation on those of you out there who are thinking of using this technique in your game? If this is something you're considering using, I will ask you a very simple question. Does this mechanic, this deck builder card ability shuffle, does this fit with your setting and your story? Because you've already made those, right? Because I talk about it all the time. You make your setting, then you make your story, then you make your system mechanics. So if you're following that, my recommendation for that, if you're considering the system mechanic of a deck builder, then you already have your setting and story. Does it fit? Does that belong? Does it fit the tone you want? Does it fit the kind of idea you have about how the setting will play out and the story? And do you want the other villains to be following this too? Because maybe the villains are pre-made, or maybe you have a villain that also has a deck of shuffled abilities, and so that villain isn't always the same when you encounter it. If this is what you want, great. This is perfect for you. If it isn't what you want, you may want to reconsider whether deck building mechanics is what you want in your game. Don't listen to me on whether I'm saying where it lies in the RPG continuum, because I think we can agree where it lies, but you may have a different point of where you draw a line saying, yeah, below this, I don't really like RPGs like this. That line is in a different place for you. But if this is something you're thinking about doing in your game, I see a lot of advantages to doing it that way. And if that fits great with your setting and story, go for it. And Wami Benito 2558, I hope that answered your question.